Welcome to the Histopathology Research Roundup for April 15th, 2025. I'm your host, Alex. On today's episode, we're diving into the rapidly evolving world of deep learning, specifically how large language models are starting to intersect with pathology and clinical decision-making. It's a really hot area right now. We'll be looking at two recent papers that explore this from slightly different but equally fascinating angles. So let's get started. So the first paper we'll look at today is titled Performance of Large Language Models in Supporting Medical Diagnosis and Treatment. This is by Diogo Sousa and colleagues, published just yesterday, April 14th, 2025, on Ars 14. The core idea here was to see how well current LLMs, models like Gemini, GPT-4, Claude, Llama, could perform on a standardized medical knowledge test. Specifically, they used the 2024 Portuguese National Exam for Medical Specialty Access, the PNA. The goal wasn't really to see if AI could replace doctors, but more if these models could act as, effective support tools for diagnosis and treatment planning. Methodologically, they took a whole bunch of these LLMs, both the big commercial ones and some open source models, and basically just fed them the 150 multiple choice questions from the exam. They used a simple approach, just taking the first answer the model gave, no fancy prompting. What I found particularly interesting was their scoring. They didn't just look at accuracy. They developed a combined score considering accuracy and cost effectiveness, because, as you might imagine, cost is a huge factor in healthcare tech adoption. They even added a penalty if a model might have been trained on the exam data itself, which is a smart consideration. The results were, pretty striking. There was a lot of variation, but several LLMs actually performed better than the human student benchmarks on this exam. The top model, OpenAI's O1, got 136 out of 150 correct. That's about 91%, just edging out the top human student score of 90%. Many models beat the median student score of 67% and even the 95th percentile score of 81%. However, when they factored in cost, the picture changed a bit. Google's Gemini 2.5 Pro and 2.0 Flash Thinking came out on top overall because they offer high accuracy at low or zero cost. Some open source models also looked quite good from a value perspective. The really expensive, high accuracy models like O1. Their overall utility score dropped because of the price tag. They also noted that models using reasoning techniques like chain of thought or COT. Let me rephrase that. Models that showed their thinking steps generally did better, suggesting that structured reasoning helps with these complex medical questions. The takeaway? LLMs are getting really good at medical knowledge tasks, potentially offering valuable, cost-effective support. But the authors rightly point out limitations. It's one exam in Portuguese, simple prompts, and stress the need for much more validation before clinical use. They see these as non-adjunctive tools, aids for clinicians, not replacements. Moving on to our next study. This one is called CliniChat, a multi-source knowledge-driven framework for clinical interview dialogue, reconstruction, and evaluation. This is from Jing Chen and colleagues, also published April 14th, 2025 on Ars 14. Now, this paper tackles a different but related challenge, using LLMs for clinical interviews. The back-and-forth conversation, where a doctor gathers patient history. The big problems here are the lack of good training data. Real interview dialogues are hard to come by due to privacy, and how to actually evaluate if an LLM is doing a good job at interviewing. So, they developed this framework, CliniChat. CliniChat has two main parts. First, there's CliniRecon. This module takes existing clinical notes. They used case studies from the PublicMed QAUSMLE dataset, and uses multiple knowledge sources, like interview guidelines, LLM knowledge, and physician expertise, to reconstruct realistic, multi-turn interview dialogues. It's a pretty involved process with steps for planning the interview flow, preparing necessary medical knowledge, setting distinct, doctor and patient roles, emphasizing empathy and natural language, and finally generating the dialogue using an LLM. The goal is to create dialogues that are systematic, professional, and, human-like. The second part is CliniEval. This is for evaluating the generated interviews. They created a really comprehensive set of metrics, 6 main ones, 30 submetrics, covering things like how well the doctor gathered the history, their interviewing technique, asking concise questions, and so on. They also developed an automated evaluation method called Demo2Eval, where a powerful LLM like GPT-4o acts like an expert physician, first creating a, quote, demonstration interview from the notes, and then comparing the generated dialogue against its demo to score it. Using CliniRecon, they created a new dataset, MedQA Dialogue, with over 10,000 dialogues. They also fine-tuned a model, CliniChat GLM, specifically for interviews. So, what did they find? Well, the dialogues created by CliniRecon were significantly better. Longer conversations, more realistic, scoring much higher, especially on history taking, compared to simpler methods. And the fine-tuned model, CliniChat GLM, significantly outperformed baseline models in simulated interviews. It was particularly strong in mastering patient history and using good interview techniques, achieving state-of-the-art results in those areas. It wasn't quite as good as the biggest models on pure diagnostic knowledge, but for the asterisk interview process itself, it showed major improvements. I think this is really important work because it provides a pathway to create better training data and evaluation tools for LLMs in this interactive clinical setting, which is quite different from just analyzing static text or images. So, wrapping up, both papers highlight the expanding capabilities of LLMs in the clinical domain, moving beyond just pattern recognition towards knowledge application and even simulated interaction. It's clear these models have huge potential as support tools, whether for diagnostic reasoning or maybe even training clinicians. Of course, validation, safety, and ethical considerations remain paramount. I'm personally excited, but also cautious to see where this research leads. That wraps up our research review for this episode. Thanks for tuning in.